As we begin our final lesson of the core series of Rescue Tri-Counties, I hope this series has thus far been of benefit to you. It is not important that you remember every little detail discussed, while that would be nice, but what is important is that you take concrete, actionable steps to increase your client's preparedness. At a minimum, your client should create an emergency plan, a go kit, and start compiling at-home emergency supplies if they do nothing else. That way, they will know what to do, where they are going, and have supplies for a few days. I hope you and your client utilize the resources provided thus far to help increase their mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery efforts and increase their resiliency to any disaster your client may face. With that said, let us begin our final lesson in our recovery series. After all the dust settles and recovery has begun, there may still be strong feelings and emotions depending on the situation and how affected your client was. Luckily for them, in the regional center system, they have a robust network of peers available to them who share very similar circumstances and challenges. It is important for them to tap into their peer networks and community to recover so that they can heal together. This lesson will cover the following topics in more detail: the role of disaster support groups, forming peer support groups, facilitating support group meetings, and how support groups increase resiliency. Once the disaster has passed and rebuilding has begun or even finished, there will still be lasting impacts to your client's mental health. Roughly 40% of people may experience emotional distress 6 months to a year after a disaster and will need ongoing support services. After disaster, it is helpful and easier to share feelings, thoughts, emotions, and experiences with others who are also impacted. Peer support groups foster community resilience and lead to an increased feeling of community, and each positive action taken can help your client feel better and more in control. By the end of this training, you will be able to help your client explain the importance of a peer support network following the disaster, identify the necessary steps and actions to start their own support group, facilitate the meetings of their support group, and explain how support groups can lead to increased disaster resiliency within your client's immediate community and those that share similar challenges. Most of us are aware of what support groups are and the purpose that they serve. Regardless, it is important that we establish what they are as it relates to this training so that we are all using the same definition throughout. So support groups are groups of people who gather to share common problems and experiences associated with a particular problem, condition, illness, or personal circumstance. Those served by regional centers may experience different struggles during a disaster. Forming a support group of people and families that share these different challenges makes it easier to relate to others in the group, and you can learn from others to help you prepare for future disasters. So what happens if your client has found a support group for the disaster that they experienced, but they feel that they can't relate to the others in the group? Maybe your client shared that others in their day program or residence have also shared the same opinion. In that case, it might be a good idea to suggest to them that they start their own support group. Depending on the size of your organization, perhaps this is something you can help with. With that said, let's start from the beginning on how to form a support group. First, find out whether there are existing national, regional, or local groups. If there's already a group that exists, it might be easier than starting your own. Start with organizations and groups that already work with individuals like those you serve. Next, consider if the group will meet for a specific time, say 6 months, or indefinitely until the group decides they no longer need to meet. Then, decide whether the group will be open to anyone who wants to join that experienced a disaster or closed so that it's only for the individuals from whom the group was meant to serve. Then, set a time and place for your support group to meet. This creates accountability by putting it in the calendar. Next, select a group leader or facilitator. Somebody will need to lead the group, so make sure to take that into consideration when you're deciding who will lead this group. That is to say, is it something that this person can handle and would be good at this role, or would it be better for them to just serve as a member of the group? Either way, it doesn't matter. You just need to find a leader of the group that others in the group will feel comfortable sharing with and being led by. Then, recruit members for the support group. That way, there is strength in numbers. Now let's imagine that we have successfully formed our support group. Everyone has agreed on a close support group that will meet for as long as is needed every Wednesday night from 7 to 8 p.m. You have offered to lead the group with your client, and you both have recruited other clients of yours that were impacted by the same disaster. That may have seemed like the hard part, but for some, that may have been easier than leading the meetings. With that said, let's talk about how to facilitate your new support group's meetings. First, prepare for the meeting by thinking about some of the topics that might come up. For every meeting after this first one, this will likely include going over notes from the previous meeting. Prepare the room for the meeting. Make sure to get there about 30 minutes before the meeting to set up the room and arrange the seating. Typically, a circular setting is normal. Leave room for people who arrive late or those using mobility assisted devices. It is also a good idea to have light refreshments and tissues available for those who may become upset reliving the disaster. Name tags are also a good idea. Begin the meeting. Greet people as they arrive and make eye contact. Try to start the meeting within 5 minutes of the scheduled time. Then, the facilitator should start the meeting and introduce themselves, who they are, and their experience with a disaster or professional experience if not a disaster survivor. Lay out the ground rules for the discussion and then go around the room with brief introductions and ask people to share why they are there. Next, begin the discussion by either using a topic that was prepared ahead of time or touch on something that was mentioned by someone else. Then, make sure to encourage participants to listen by making eye contact with the speaker, not moving around a lot, and nodding. As the facilitator, a good way to facilitate conversation is to acknowledge what was said back to them when answering, such as, I understand that you were upset with being told to evacuate by the firefighter. Then, you're going to want to encourage others to offer support to each other. This can be done by demonstrating active listening skills. If someone has said something that was clearly deeply personal or upsetting, wait 10 seconds or so, and if no one has said anything, offer support to them to set the example to encourage others to do the same as the meeting continues. Next, encourage members to talk about themselves. As a facilitator, to maintain trust from the group from time to time, make sure to share personal feelings and thoughts with the group. If group members seem to be more closed off, the facilitator may need to ask open-ended questions, such as, what was it like when X happened and how did it make you feel? This will also encourage other participants to disclose personal information. If it is recurring in meetings that participants are not sharing, instructing members to journal may help spark discussion at the next meeting. Offer support to members. This is the point of the group. Offer members hope and encouragement when they share. This can be done by showing understanding, sympathy, or concern. Body language can also convey this as well. Great care and thought should be taken in offering physical comfort, such as a hand on the back, as it may be a trigger for a participant. Next, help the problem solve. It is a good idea for the group to work together to help solve problems, as that is the expectation of support groups. This can be done by clarifying the problem first so that everyone understands the problem. Next, talk about alternative solutions to the problem, avoiding making it sound like advice. The purpose of this group isn't to tell people what to do, but rather empower them to solve their own problems. Next, as a group, work together to choose which options to take and discuss the pros and cons of each. Doing this will help the person choose the solution that works for them. Also, make sure it is known that the group cares and wants to know the outcome of the solution chosen. Last is offering help. This can be related to the problem, or perhaps it is another problem, such as transportation to future meetings. Group members may offer to assist each other as trust grows. Then it's going to be time to close the meeting. The meeting will need to be closed. Most support groups meet for 1 to 2 hours. Make sure to stick to time. However, if in the middle of solving a problem, it may be okay to go over a few minutes. Some good ways to close the meeting are to summarize the topics discussed at the meeting, ask if there are any last comments or questions, remind members of the next meeting, request volunteers to help set up the next meeting, thank everyone for their time and encourage them to continue to attend, and after the meeting, make sure to jot down some final notes while still fresh in your mind to help start the next meeting. Now, while it might not seem like it, but I did try to parse down this training as much as I could because of how dense the topic is. For those that want more detail and examples of each of the steps for forming and facilitating a meeting, please reference the comprehensive guide found at the top of the resources slide. As we close out this training, I will refer once again to the cycle of emergency management. Since the cycle is always repeating, this part of the recovery cycle, holding a support group, also serves a dual purpose. It is helping victims of disaster recover from the emotional toll of the disaster while building resilience and serving as a mitigation measure to help prepare the mind of the victim for the next disaster. Studies show that positive social support of high quality can enhance resilience to stress, help protect against developing trauma-related psychopathology, decrease the functional consequences of trauma-induced disorders such as PTSD, and reduce medical morbidity and mortality. Support groups also enhance individual and collective coping strategies and resilience. Therefore, by building psychological resilience to disaster, you mitigate future impacts and the community benefits as a whole. Here is a great example of how support groups can help wildfire victims.
Morgan Romero shows us how a support group helps in the healing. Morgan.
That's right. One night a week at Foothills Church in Staten, you can find a diverse group of people with something in common, something they wish they didn't share.
We all suffered some sort of loss last year, a year ago on the fire, whether it was an outbuilding, a home, or just having to evacuate.
Putting one step each day in front of the next and moving forward.
A year ago, flames took Bruce Bailey's and Kathleen Beecher's home east of Gates. The Kirks lost theirs on North Fork Road in Elkhorn. Both families are now rebuilding their homes and lives. They both learned, as essential to the process as any money or materials, is each other.
People love this area. They love the Santiam Canyon, so they have a real connectedness, sense of community here.
They're part of a group of wildfire survivors that gets together for support and counseling each week. In April, it began as a safe space to vent and grieve.
Everybody had some sort of traumatic experience.
There's just been no judgment. You realize it's just stuff. You lose stuff.
It soon evolved into a space to share information and triumphs.
The first thing we do is share good news. And it just became this sharing resources and eating together and knowing we were safe.
So any sort of roadblocks that we may have had, it's just been good to bounce ideas off each other. And a lot of people have ways around it or, what's worked for them.
Marion County facilitates the group, providing meals and any supports people need. They've given survivors the reins.
Really this neighbor helping neighbor, being there for one another, caring about one another. And this is very critical because it created an energy, a positive energy that gave people a sense of hope for the future.
On the 1-year anniversary, as smoke again settles in the canyon from a nearby fire, they now lean on each other.
We've reached out to our wildfire survivors in this group just to check in to make sure they're doing okay from this weekend. It kind of digs up some new emotions. So we're going to definitely continue.
Morgan Romero, KGW News.
These resource links can be found on the TCRC website and the Rescue Tri-County section, as well as in the video description below. As previously stated, our first resource is a comprehensive support group formation guide. This is a practical guide on creating and maintaining peer support groups with step-by-step strategies for fostering connection and resilience. The next is the value of peer support groups following disaster, and this explores how peer support groups help individuals process grief and trauma, reducing isolation and fostering recovery after disasters. Next is developing trauma-resilient communities. This highlights strategies for building stronger, more resilient communities by enhancing local capacities to support trauma survivors. And then we have the online peer support network. It's an overview of virtual peer support platforms, making connection and emotional support accessible anytime, anywhere. And this would be the time where you could ask questions if I was presenting this in person. However, since you're watching a recording, please send any questions you have to the TCRC ERC. My contact information can be found on the screen. Today we covered the value of support groups following a disaster, how to start and facilitate peer support groups, and how support groups help prepare communities for future disasters by building resilience. Thank you so much for your time and your commitment to safety and disaster preparedness. As usual, I welcome any and all feedback on this training. These are some of the reference sources for the material presented in this presentation. You can find them on the TCRC website in the Rescue Tri-County section or in the video description below.